Welcome everyone to By Jash Channel. All right, so today we're going a deep dive into the life of a man named Zouga Ballantyne. And wow, you guys really gave me a lot to work with. Historical accounts, adventure stories, personal letters. It's a lot.
It really is a fascinating mix of sources, you know? It's amazing how they come together to paint this picture, this really multifaceted picture of this guy. And he's a complex guy, driven by this vision of getting rich, getting powerful in the heart of Africa.
Yeah, and it seems like his vision is really where this whole thing takes off, right? The Ballantyne concession. This document basically gives him the mineral rights to this massive area. I mean, we're talking like the size of France here. It sounds kind of like something out of a treasure map, you know? Right. Promising untold riches and all that.
Absolutely. But that's where things get really interesting. This wasn't some easy, I'm going to get rich quick scheme. This concession, it required a ton of capital, something that Zouga spent years and years trying to get a hold of. Just trying to convince other people to buy into his dream, to share his vision, was this huge challenge.
So he's got this grand vision, this huge plan, but then the reality on the ground, you know, when he actually gets to Africa, it's a lot different, a lot harsher.
Yeah.
His journey into the interior with his wife, Aletta, it was brutal. Just scorching heat, constantly worried about getting sick. I mean, just the physical hardship alone would have made most people turn back. Right?
Oh, absolutely. But Zouga, he just kept going, never wavered. You remember that story where they lose some of their oxen? I mean, these animals, they were essential, right? They needed them for the journey. But you know what Zouga says? All he says is it was necessary. It's almost like he just shut off any emotion that could, like, slow him down, you know?
That's a really good point. It's more than just leadership, right? It's like a defense mechanism, a way to just cope with all the pressure that was on him.
Yeah, exactly. And you see this same kind of, like, stoicism when they hit another setback. So they have this measured brandy ration, but Zouga just ignores it. He fills up Jan Cherut's mug to the brim. He acknowledges the hardship, but he refuses to let it, you know, break him.
Wow. I can't even imagine having that kind of focus, especially in such a difficult place. But while Zouga was so fixated on his goals, what about his wife? What about Aletta? I mean, the sources we have, they kind of suggest that she wasn't exactly thrilled about this whole African adventure.
No, she wasn't. Aletta wanted a normal life, you know, intimacy, a real home. But her pleas to leave, to get out of that dangerous environment, they went ignored for the most part. It kind of adds this tragic element to their relationship, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. You have to wonder, did Zouga's ambition, did it come at the cost of his personal relationships? And then, right when things are looking pretty bleak, a new element pops up. Diamonds.
Diamonds. Always so alluring, right? So there's this Welshman, Black Thomas, and he finds a diamond in the region. And suddenly, boom, you've got a diamond rush, everyone's scrambling, including Zouga. His focus shifts from gold to these, you know, sparkling stones, which just makes everything even more volatile.
It seems like he was always chasing the next big thing, never really content. There's this scene where he bets everything, his last penny, on this diamond claim, all alone, desperate.
That scene, man, it's powerful. This man, he risked everything, went through so much, and he's still willing to gamble it all away. And the thing is, it wasn't just him who was affected. He talks about feeling guilty over what his son Jordan is going through. You can see how his ambition is taking a toll on him personally, on his family.
Yeah, that guilt is a really important detail. It shows that underneath that relentless ambition, there's this internal struggle. He knows he's making sacrifices, but he just can't seem to change course.
It's true. And there's this interesting part in the source material. It's like this juxtaposition between Zouga's obsessive ambition and his observations of, get this, of wildebeest. He calls them the clowns of the veldt, these animals that just seem to be moving in this, you know, pointless chaos. It almost makes you wonder if, for a second, he saw himself in them, in their frenzy.
Huh. That's a really interesting take. Was it self-doubt? Was he reflecting on his own pursuits, thinking about how they might be, you know, futile?
It's tough to say for sure, but one thing's clear. Even with these little moments of introspection, Zouga, he keeps pushing forward. He goes deeper into dangerous territory. He's facing more and more conflict with the Boers, running into all sorts of shady characters, and there's just this constant threat of violence.
Man, it sounds like a recipe for disaster. But the sources also talk about Zouga's resourcefulness, how prepared he always was. Even when things seemed peaceful, he always had his rifle ready.
He knew in this environment you couldn't let your guard down. Survival depended on being vigilant, on being ready for anything. But it wasn't just about him. He was also really protective of his family, of his companions, especially Jordan and his friend Jan Cherut.
So we've got a leader, a protector, but also a gambler, a risk taker. Seems like a lot of contradictions, right? What do you think about all this so far, listener? Are you starting to get a sense of who Zouga was?
And remember, he's operating in this really complex environment, right? The diamond rush, it brought all these fortune seekers flooding in, and that created a lot of tension with the Boers, with the people who had already been there. It was about more than diamonds. It was this clash of cultures, of values, of different ways of life.
Yeah, the Boers, they relied on cheap labor
Yeah.
from the native populations. And this diamond rush, it was messing with that whole system. They saw these miners, these people chasing wealth, as almost like sacrilegious.
Exactly. And that clash, it created this really volatile atmosphere. It was full of suspicion and resentment.
It's clear that Zouga's dealing with this web of relationships, trying to balance his own ambitions with keeping the people around him safe.
Yeah.
And speaking of relationships, let's talk about his sons, Ralph and Jordan. They add a whole other layer to this story, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. You've got Ralph, the adventurous one, always pushing the limits. And then you've got Jordan, who's carrying the weight of this really traumatic experience. Their dynamics with Zouga, they're fascinating.
The relationship between Ralph and Zouga seems really interesting, right? There's this tension there, almost like a rivalry. Ralph's ambitious, too, and he wants to prove himself.
Yeah, it's like he was trying to, one-up his father.
Yeah.
To show that he could handle this wild frontier, too. Remember that story about him hunting and killing the Boland? This magnificent, it's this display of skill, but it also kind of hints at this potential conflict with his dad.
It's like he's saying, look what I can do, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just as capable as you are. But then on the other hand, you've got Jordan. His childhood was marked by this horrific ordeal, being kidnapped and tortured by the Stewart twins, these incredibly cruel individuals. It's no wonder he's, different.
Those scenes in the sources, they're hard to read. It really highlights how brutal things were and the impact it had on Jordan, and the impact that just stayed with him.
And the dangers? They didn't stop there. There's this incident with an overloaded gravel cart in the mine, this really stark reminder of how dangerous their lives were, how quickly things could go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. They were living on the edge. They were dealing with threats from other people, and the environment itself was a threat. And then, right when you think things can't get any more complicated, we're introduced to this incredible character, Bazo.
Bazo, Matabele warrior. At first he seems like a threat, but then he becomes this, complicated ally to Zouga. It's a relationship with all these twists and turns. Betrayal, mistrust, but also moments of real connection, of respect.
It reminds you that in this crazy world, alliances can change. Even enemies can find some common ground.
And, speaking of unpredictable, we should talk about the green dragon diamond.
Now there's a story. This rare green diamond, it just highlights that desire for instant wealth, the thing that drove so many people to this harsh environment. Fortunes could be made and lost in a heartbeat.
I bet it must have been incredible to find a gem like that. But along with that potential for riches, we also see that darker side of the diamond rush. Like with Barry Lennox, this gambler who is known for living large and his fondness for, dusky trios.
Lennox is like the poster boy for excess and overindulgence. He's got all this sudden wealth, and it's all about temptation and vice. A real contrast to the hardships that most people were facing in the diamond fields.
And it's that world that Ralph gets pulled into. Remember his fascination with spider fighting?
Oh, yeah. It's brutal, for sure. But it kind of captures that desire for thrills, for spectacle that was all over the diamond fields.
And then there's Ralph's personal life.
Yeah.
His thing for Louise St. John. This woman who's, unattainable. She represents this world of elegance and refinement that he wants to be a part of so badly.
Right. But then he meets Lil, and that changes everything. She opens up this whole new world for him, a world of pleasure, of self-discovery. She wants him to embrace his desires and not worry about what society thinks.
It's a passionate, intense relationship, and even though it doesn't last, it really leaves a mark on both of them. Later on, Lil even talks about how their time together felt like being the first and only woman in the world, and she says she feels that way about Ralph again, even later on.
Wow, that detail really says a lot about the impact they had on each other. But that kind of freedom, it comes with a price. Ralph's spending gets out of control, he's involved with Lil, and it leads to this huge fight with Zouga.
Yeah, physical fight. It's this clash of values of what they want out of life. You can see how deep the divide is between them, between father and son. And while Ralph's figuring out what he wants, Jordan's on a totally different path. He's searching for something deeper, something more profound.
He's haunted by his mother leaving, drawn to this mythical bird goddess, Pains. His story goes to a darker place, more psychological,
Some of his actions, like the thing with the sacrificial lamb and his dad's hunting knife, they're disturbing. It makes you wonder, listener, was Jordan trying to connect with his mother? Was he looking for a strong female figure in his life? Or was there something darker going on?
It's a question that stays with you as we dig into the historical side of things.
Right. The sources give us some background on the Matabele people, their warrior culture, their history, and the growing conflict with the white settlers.
Imagine a proud warrior culture, kind of like the Spartans or Vikings, and they feel like their land's being taken from them. No surprise that things are tense.
And in the middle of all this, we meet Robin Codrington, this missionary. She becomes a really key figure.
She's fascinating, strong-willed, really devout, not afraid of anyone. The source material describes her as someone who held everyone accountable. She spared no one, didn't matter who they were.
She had this amazing ability to connect with people from all walks of life. She even gained the trust of Lobengula, the Matabele king.
That's incredible, right? There's this great scene where she confronts Lobengula about his overeating, even comparing him to his father who died from it. And Lobengula, even though he's the king, he listens to her. It shows how deep their relationship was, the respect they had for each other.
Wow, she was a force to be reckoned with. But her strength is really tested when Louise St. John, the wife of this powerful settler, disappears in the wilderness.
Louise's story is terrifying, but also inspiring. She's left to die, completely alone. She has to rely on her instincts and willpower just to survive. Imagine being lost like that, drinking dew from leaves just to stay alive.
It really shows the resilience of the human spirit, the incredible strength that people can find when they're facing incredible adversity. But while Louise is fighting to survive, a military patrol, led by Major Wilson, is sent in to deal with the Matabele.
And this expedition, it marks a real turning point in the story. Things escalate. It's like a shift towards open warfare.
Yeah, and the outcome of that expedition is a total mystery. The patrol is ambushed, completely wiped out. All we have are rumors and speculation.
The sources hint at betrayal, hidden motives, even rumors of the supernatural.
And then there's Clinton Codrington, Robin's love. No one knows for sure what happened to him.
Some say he died in the massacre. Others believe he escaped somehow. But Robin, even though the evidence is stacking up against her, she refuses to give up hope.
It's admirable, her faith, but it's also heartbreaking. That kind of belief can keep you going, but it can also stop you from dealing with your grief, from moving on.
And while Robin is dealing with all this uncertainty and grief, we have another character who comes back with a vengeance. Mungo St. John, Louise's husband.
Right. He blames Clinton for everything that's gone wrong. He sees Clinton as this symbol of all his problems. It's classic revenge, driven by resentment, and that desire to get back what he thinks he's lost.
Mungo's more than just a bad guy, you know. He's got his own demons, he's got to prove himself, and maybe, just maybe, he's also looking for some redemption.
And that search leads him to Robin. It's really something how these two from such different worlds with such different beliefs, how they end up connected.
They challenge each other, push each other's buttons, and in the end, they force each other to really look at themselves, at their deepest fears and desires. Even in all this conflict and chaos, there's still room for human connection, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Welcome back. Before we get into all the conflict and surprising connections and stuff, let's go back to Jordan for a minute. All that stuff with the Matabele, that weird ritual. What do you think about all that, listener?
It's definitely creepy, right? Like, one of the most unsettling parts of the story. And remember how obsessed he was with that bird goddess, what's her name?
Yeah.
Pains.
Yeah, Pains.
She's described as this, like, falcon-headed goddess living in this black mountain of death.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like he was, I don't know, drawn to the dark side.
You're picking up on something important there. Jordan's fascination with the Matabele, these warriors known for their brutality, it seems to mirror that attraction to darkness, right? He was just soaking up information about their conquests, how they started, their whole warrior code.
Yeah, it's almost like he was romanticizing their violence, seeing it as this form of power. Maybe it was his way of dealing with the violence that he went through himself with the Stewart twins, you know?
That's a really interesting connection. That trauma, it definitely had a lasting impact. Maybe he saw some of his own pain reflected in the Matabele's ferocity, their uncompromising nature.
But we can't forget the history here either, right? The sources mention Mzilikazi, this war chief who led the Matabele on this super bloody conquest. They were brutal, calling the tribes they conquered things like cattle and eaters of dirt.
Yeah, and that adds another layer to Jordan's fascination. It makes you ask some tough questions. Was he just trying to understand a different culture? Or was there something more to it? Was he identifying with their ruthlessness?
It's something to think about as we move on to another big character, Robin Codrington, the missionary. She's like the opposite of all the violence and ambition we've been talking about.
Totally. Robin's like this beacon of faith and compassion in the middle of all this conflict. Super religious, independent, not afraid to challenge anyone. Remember how the sources describe her? She spared no one when it came to her morals.
She held everyone to her standards, no matter who they were. And that fearlessness, it helped her connect with people, even Lobengula, the Matabele king.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it. Think about that scene where she calls him out for eating too much. She even compares him to his own father who died from it.
And Lobengula, as powerful as he was, he listens to her. Even jokes that she's trying to starve him. It shows how close they were, how much respect they had for each other, even though they came from such different worlds.
It's a great example of how real connection can overcome anything, even cultural differences. And you see Robin connecting with others when Louise St. John disappears.
Yeah, Louise's story is wild. She's left for dead out in the wilderness, and she has to rely on her instincts just to survive. It's crazy to think about what she went through, having to drink dew off leaves to stay hydrated.
It shows you what humans can do, how we can adapt and survive. She wasn't just giving up, she was actively fighting to live, using her knowledge of nature to find food and shelter.
And while she's doing that, the conflict between the settlers and the Matabele, it boils over with Major Wilson's expedition.
That military patrol, it was meant to subdue the Matabele, but it was a turning point, for sure. It was like the start of open warfare. No going back from there.
And no one really knows what happened to the patrol. They were ambushed, completely wiped out. All we have are rumors and theories. Was it a trap? Was someone betrayed?
The sources don't really give us clear answers, just hints and whispers. Some say it was a planned attack. Others say it was like supernatural forces. And all that uncertainty, it just made the settlers more paranoid and afraid, made the divide even deeper.
And then there's Clinton Codrington, Robin's love. We still don't know what happened to him.
Right, did he die in the massacre or did he escape? No one knows for sure. But Robin, she just can't give up hope, even with everyone telling her he's gone.
Her faith is incredible, but it's hard to hear. It keeps her going, but it also might be stopping her from dealing with her grief, from accepting what happened. Makes you wonder, listener, when does hope turn into denial? What happens when you hold on to something that might not be real?
While Robin's going through all that, we have Mungo St. John, Louise's husband, who comes back to Africa with one goal: revenge. He blames Clinton for ruining his life.
It's like a classic revenge story, fueled by all that resentment and the need to get back what he thinks he's lost.
But Mungo's more than just a villain. He's complicated. He's got this need to prove himself, he's haunted by his past, and maybe, just maybe, he's looking for redemption too.
In that search for redemption, it leads him to Robin. It's weird how those two, from such different backgrounds with completely different beliefs, how they end up connected.
Their dynamic is so interesting. They challenge each other, push each other's buttons, and they end up making each other face their deepest fears and desires. Even with all the conflict going on, they find this connection. It just shows you human connection can pop up anywhere, even in the craziest situations.
And as the war between the settlers and the Matabele gets worse, the consequences get more serious. People are dying, families are being torn apart, and it feels like society is falling apart.
It really makes you think about how violence just keeps happening and the scars it leaves both on individuals and on whole communities. It's all there. The desire for wealth, the clash of cultures, the need for revenge, all these things come together to create this destructive mess.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement, the ambition, the chase for wealth and power. But these stories, they remind us that there's a price for all of it, not just in lives lost, but in the loss of trust, the breaking down of communities, and the trauma it inflicts on people.
And yet, even when things are at their worst, you can still find hope. You see acts of kindness, of sacrifice. You see people choosing compassion and forgiveness instead of hatred and revenge. These might be small acts, but they remind us that even when things seem impossible, the human spirit can still find a way.
Last time, we were talking about Major Wilson's expedition and what happened to Clinton Codrington. It seems like every account we have is, just full of holes. Nobody really knows what happened.
It's true. The whole massacre, it became this symbol. For the settlers, it was proof that the Matabele were savage, unpredictable, like they couldn't be trusted.
But we also have those sources from the Matabele side, right? They talk about the patrol acting all high and mighty, ignoring their customs, always ready to fight. It gives you a totally different perspective on things.
For sure. It challenges that simple story, the us versus them thing. It shows that both sides had their good and bad moments, their moments of bravery and their moments of cruelty. Both sides made mistakes, and both sides had people who were willing to sacrifice themselves.
And Robin's stuck in the middle of it all. She can't accept that Clinton might be gone. Everyone's telling her he's dead, but she refuses to believe it.
Her faith is amazing, but it's also kind of sad, It might be helping her cope, but it's also keeping her from really grieving, from moving on.
It makes you think, right, listener, when does hope become denial? What happens when you hold on to something that might not even be real?
While Robin's struggling with all that, Mungo St. John comes back to Africa, and he wants one thing: revenge. He blames Clinton for everything bad that's happened to him. It's that classic revenge story, driven by resentment and that need to get back what he thinks was taken from him.
But there's more to Mungo than just being a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
He's got his own baggage, he needs to prove himself, and maybe, just maybe, he's also looking for some kind of redemption.
And that search for redemption, it leads him to Robin. It's crazy how these two, from completely different worlds with totally opposite beliefs, they end up connected.
It's a wild dynamic. They challenge each other, they get under each other's skin, and in a way, they force each other to confront their deepest fears and desires. Even in all this mess, in all this conflict, they find each other. It just shows you human connection can happen anywhere, even in the most unexpected places.
And as the war gets worse, the consequences get more and more serious. People are dying, families are being destroyed, and it feels like everything's falling apart. It's a harsh reminder of how violence just keeps going and how much damage it does. Damage to people, damage to communities. It just leaves these scars that never really go away.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the adventure, the ambition, the pursuit of wealth and power. But these stories, they make it clear that it all comes at a price. People die, trust is broken, communities are shattered, and the trauma, it lingers.
But even in those dark moments, you can still find glimmers of hope. You see people being kind, being selfless. You see people choosing compassion and forgiveness instead of hate and revenge. These acts, they might seem small, but they remind us that even when things are awful, the human spirit can still find a way.
So as we step back from all these stories, what does it all mean? What have we learned from this deep dive into Zouga Ballantyne's life and the world he lived in?
We've seen how ambition, whether it's personal or on a bigger scale, can be a powerful force, but it can also be dangerous. We've seen what happens when cultures clash, and when the desire for wealth and power takes over and pushes aside things like compassion and understanding, it leads to tragedy.
We've also seen how much our choices matter. Even in the middle of all the chaos and conflict, we still have the power to choose compassion over hate, to choose forgiveness over revenge, and to choose hope over despair. These stories, they make us think about our own beliefs, our own motivations, and how our choices affect the world around us.
And maybe most importantly, these stories remind us that the human spirit is incredibly strong. It's capable of amazing things, both good and bad. It can be incredibly resilient, but it can also experience deep despair. But ultimately, it seems like we're all searching for connection, for meaning, for a place to belong in a world that can be chaotic and unforgiving.
Thanks for coming with us on this journey, this deep dive into the heart of Africa. We hope you enjoyed exploring these stories with us. They're complicated, they're fascinating, and hopefully they've given you something to think about.